The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, breaking the pre-dawn silence that had settled over forward operating base Kandahar like a shroud. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez pressed his headset closer to his ear, straining to make sense of the garbled transmission bleeding through the white noise. What he heard would haunt him for the rest of his career. Mayday, Mayday, Echo 77, taking heavy fire, coordinates. The voice dissolved into electronic chaos before cutting to dead air. Echo 77. The call sign belonged to a six-man SEAL reconnaissance team that had been dark for 18 hours, operating deep in the Korangal Valley, where the mountains swallowed radio signals like hungry mouths. Their mission had been classified beyond Rodriguez's clearance level, but whispers in the operations tent spoke of high-value targets and time-sensitive intelligence. Now, something had gone catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Colonel James Hartwell burst through the operations center doors, his desert camouflage still bearing creases from where he'd been sleeping. His weathered face, carved by 2 decades of combat deployments, showed the kind of controlled urgency that separated career officers from weekend warriors. Behind him trailed Major Patricia Vance, the base's intelligence officer, clutching a tablet displaying satellite imagery that painted a grim picture. "Sir, we've lost all contact with Echo 77, Rodriguez reported, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. Last transmission indicated they were under heavy enemy fire in Grid Sector 794. Hartwell studied the topographical map spread across the command table, his fingers tracing the jagged lines that represented the canyon system where his men had vanished. The Korangal was a graveyard of good intentions, a place where American blood had been spilled for over a decade without measurable progress. The locals called it the Valley of Death, and for good reason. "What assets do we have available for immediate deployment?" Hartwell demanded, his gray eyes scanning the duty roster mounted on the wall. "2 Apache gunships are 20 minutes out on routine patrol," Vance replied, her finger sliding across the tablet's surface. "We have a Predator drone repositioning now, but the weather's closing in fast. Visibility is dropping to near zero." The colonel's jaw tightened. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours when American lives hung in the balance. In the brutal arithmetic of combat, every second mattered. Every heartbeat could be the difference between a rescue and a recovery mission. Outside, the Afghan wind howled through the base's razor wire perimeter, carrying with it the promise of the sandstorm that meteorology had been tracking since midnight. Nature, it seemed, had chosen sides. Rodriguez watched his commanding officer's face, recognizing the weight of command settling on Hartwell's shoulders like an invisible yoke. Somewhere in those mountains, 6 of America's finest warriors were fighting for their lives, and the clock was ticking toward an outcome nobody wanted to contemplate. The radio silence stretched on, each passing moment amplifying the gravity of their situation. In that suffocating quiet, decisions would be made that would echo through the lives of everyone in that room. Some choices, Rodriguez knew, changed everything that followed. Thunder rolled across the valley floor, though no clouds darkened the star-filled sky above. The sound was too rhythmic, too mechanical. Someone was bringing the fight to them. The first rounds impacted the SEAL team's position at 3:52 hours, transforming their carefully chosen Overwatch point into a killing field within seconds. Staff Sergeant Marcus, Reaper, Thompson pressed his face into the rocky Afghan soil as bullets whined overhead, their supersonic cracks splitting the mountain air like invisible whips. "Contact front, multiple enemy positions." The voice belonged to Petty Officer First Class Diego Ramirez, the team's communications specialist, whose usual calm demeanor had evaporated under the withering barrage of automatic weapons fire. Thompson army crawled toward his team leader, Chief Petty Officer William Ghost McKenzie, who was methodically returning fire with his modified M4 carbine. McKenzie's face, remained stone-cold professional even as chips of granite exploded around his position, the result of enemy snipers who had somehow managed to achieve overwatch on their overwatch. "We're compromised," Mackenzie stated with the kind of matter-of-fact delivery that made him legendary among Special Operations Command. "Someone fed them our position." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had begun as a routine reconnaissance mission to photograph suspected weapons caches had transformed into a nightmare scenario. The SEALs found themselves trapped on a narrow ledge halfway up the canyon wall, with enemy fighters above and below their position. The rocky outcropping that had provided concealment now served as their prison. Petty Officer Second Class Anthony "Doc" Williams, the team's medic, was treating Petty Officer Third Class Jake Morrison, whose left shoulder had been opened by shrapnel from an RPG that had detonated against the cliff face. Morrison's breathing was labored but controlled, his training overriding the shock that would have incapacitated a lesser man. "How bad?" Mackenzie asked without taking his eyes off his rifle's scope. "Through and through," Doc replied, his hands working with practiced efficiency to apply pressure dressings. "He'll live, but he's combat ineffective." The sixth member of their team, Petty Officer Second Class Connor "Havoc" O'Sullivan, had positioned himself at the far end of their defensive perimeter, his sniper rifle seeking targets among the maze of boulders and caves that honeycombed the canyon walls. His spotter scope revealed at least 30 enemy fighters, possibly more, coordinating their assault with a level of tactical sophistication that suggested foreign training. "Chief, we've got a problem," O'Sullivan called out between rifle shots. "These aren't your typical Taliban fighters. They're moving with purpose, using fire and maneuver tactics. Someone's been schooling them." Mackenzie processed this information while calculating their rapidly diminishing options. Their ammunition supply was finite, their position was compromised, and extraction seemed impossible given the enemy's numerical superiority and positional advantage. The nearest friendly forces were 40 kilometers away across terrain that would take hours to traverse, even under ideal conditions. "Ramirez, what's our communication status?" Mackenzie demanded. "Intermittent at best, Chief. The canyon walls are blocking most of our transmissions, and the enemy's jamming what gets through." The situation report painted a picture that every special operations warrior dreaded: isolated, outnumbered, and running out of time. Mackenzie had seen good men die in similar circumstances, their final moments spent fighting impossible odds with characteristic courage but inevitable outcomes. Above them, the enemy fighters were repositioning for what appeared to be a coordinated assault. Their muzzle flashes painted temporary constellations against the pre-dawn darkness, each flash representing another threat to American lives. Mackenzie keyed his radio, hopping against hope that someone somewhere was listening to their desperate transmission as the noose began to tighten around Echo 77. The transmission reached Forward Operating Base Kandahar as little more than electronic fragments, scattered syllables that Rodriguez's trained ear managed to piece together like a deadly jigsaw puzzle. The words that emerged from the static sent ice through his veins. "Surrounded. Need immediate. Coordinates 479." Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell leaned over the radio operator's shoulder, his face illuminated by the green glow of the frequency display. The partial coordinates placed Echo 77 deep in enemy territory, in a section of the Korangal Valley where rescue operations had historically ended in disaster. "Can you clean that up?" Hartwell asked, though they both knew the answer. Rodriguez worked his equipment with the skill of a surgeon, adjusting frequencies and filters in an attempt to penetrate the electronic fog that shrouded their men's voices. The results were heartbreaking fragments: "taking casualties," and "ammunition running low," emerged from the white noise like cries from another dimension. Major Vance consulted her tablet, her expression growing darker with each passing second. "Sir, The weather window is closing fast. That sandstorm will ground all aircraft within the hour. If we're going to attempt a rescue, it has to be now." The colonel studied the tactical display, his mind racing through scenarios that all seemed to end in variations of catastrophe. The Apache gunships were still 15 minutes out, but the canyon's narrow confines would limit their effectiveness. A ground assault would take hours to organize and execute, time that Echo 77 clearly didn't have. "What about the Air Force assets?" Hartwell asked, grasping for options that might not exist. "Negative, sir. The nearest A-10s are at Bagram, 2 hours flight time minimum. The weather's already grounding most fixed-wing operations." Rodriguez continued his desperate attempts to re-establish communication, his fingers dancing across dials and switches with the kind of focused intensity that bordered on religious devotion. Somewhere in the electronic chaos, 6 American warriors were fighting for their lives, and he was their only connection to salvation. The base's commanding general, Major General Robert Sterling, arrived in the operations center like a force of nature, his presence immediately shifting the room's dynamics. Sterling had earned his stars in Iraq and Afghanistan, accumulating the kind of combat experience that made junior officers nervous and enemy commanders respectful. "Situation report," Sterling demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that shaped history. Hartwell provided a rapid briefing while Sterling studied the topographical maps and satellite imagery. The general's face remained impassive, but Rodriguez noticed the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested the weight of command pressing down like a physical force. "Options?" Sterling asked. "Limited, sir. Weather's turning bad, closest air support is hours away, and a ground rescue would take too long to organize." Sterling nodded grimly, his mind clearly working through calculations that involved American lives measured against tactical realities. These were the moments that defined military careers and haunted dreams for decades afterward. The radio crackled again, producing a clearer transmission that made everyone in the room freeze. "This is Echo 77 Actual. We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate close air support. We cannot hold this position much longer." The voice belonged to Chief Mackenzie, and its controlled desperation spoke volumes about their tactical situation. Sterling looked at the weather reports, the asset availability charts, and the grim mathematics of rescue operations in hostile territory. Outside, the wind was already beginning to howl with the promise of the approaching storm. At exactly 3:59 hours, as the situation in the operations center reached critical mass, a new voice cut through the radio static with crystalline clarity. It was a woman's voice, calm and professional, carrying the kind of confidence that made hardened warriors pause and listen. "Kandahar Base, this is Phantom 79 requesting permission to enter your airspace for emergency fuel stop." Rodriguez glanced at his frequency display, confirming that the transmission was coming through on the emergency channel. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell frowned, consulting his flight schedule tablet with the expression of someone encountering an unwelcome variable in an already complex equation. "Phantom 79 Kandahar Base, you are not on our scheduled arrivals. Please state your mission and aircraft type." The response came immediately, delivered with the kind of precision that suggested military training. "Kandahar Base, Phantom 79 is a single F-16C Falcon, callsign Banshee, en route from Al Udeid to Bagram on classified transport mission, requesting emergency fuel due to headwind delays." Major Vance was already pulling up identification databases on her tablet, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the touch screen. "Sir, I'm not showing any scheduled classified transports through our airspace tonight." Sterling stepped closer to the radio console, his weathered face reflecting the kind of suspicion that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. Unscheduled aircraft in contested airspace were almost always bad news, especially when they arrived during ongoing tactical emergencies. Phantom 79, transmit your authorization codes immediately. The delay stretched for several heartbeats before the woman's voice returned, now carrying a subtle edge that suggested she was accustomed to being questioned. Kandahar Base, my authorization codes are classified above your clearance level. I need fuel and I need it now. I'm already running on fumes. Rodriguez watched his commanding officers exchange the kind of meaningful glances that spoke volumes about their predicament. Protocol demanded that they deny landing permission to any unverified aircraft, but emergency fuel requests fell into a gray area that could cost lives if handled incorrectly. "Sir," Rodriguez interjected quietly, "her radio procedures are perfect. She's definitely military trained." Sterling nodded slowly, his mind clearly weighing risks against potential benefits. The timing of this mystery aircraft's arrival seemed too coincidental to ignore, especially given their current crisis in the Korangal Valley. Phantom 79, what is your pilot's name and service record? The response carried a hint of impatience. Kandahar Base, I am Major Indira Banshee, Thorn, United States Air Force. Serial number classified. I've been flying combat missions since before some of your personnel were born, and right now I need fuel more than I need your bureaucratic clearance procedures. Major Vance looked up from her tablet, her expression showing surprise. Sir, I'm showing a Major Indira Thorn in the Air Force database. Combat pilot, multiple deployments, but her current assignment is listed as classified. The radio crackled with another desperate transmission from Echo 77. Kandahar Base, this is Echo 77. We are being overrun. Immediate assistance required. Sterling's jaw tightened as the tactical situation crystallized in his mind. Somewhere in the mountains, American warriors were dying, and a mystery pilot had just arrived claiming to need fuel. The coincidence was either divine intervention or enemy deception, and he had seconds to decide which. Clear her for emergency landing, Sterling ordered, but have security meet that aircraft the moment it touches down. Outside, the sound of jet engines could already be heard approaching through the darkness. The F-16C Fighting Falcon that materialized out of the pre-dawn darkness looked like something from another era of warfare. Its desert camouflage paint scheme was faded and worn, bearing the scars of countless combat missions in the form of patched bullet holes and replaced panels. The aircraft's nose art depicted a spectral female figure with flowing hair and outstretched wings, beneath which the name Banshee was painted in elegant script. Rodriguez watched through the operations center's reinforced windows as the Falcon taxied toward the fuel depot, its single Pratt & Whitney turbofan engine producing the distinctive whine that separated F-16s from every other fighter aircraft in the American inventory. The pilot's skill was evident in the way she handled the aircraft during ground operations, making minute adjustments with the kind of precision that spoke to thousands of hours of flight time. Security teams are in position, reported Captain James Murphy, the base's security officer, his voice crackling through the radio from his position near the refueling area. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell studied the mysterious aircraft through binoculars, noting details that seemed inconsistent with a routine transport mission. The F-16 carried external fuel tanks, but it also mounted weapons pylons that suggested combat capabilities. More importantly, its radar warning receiver antennas and electronic countermeasures pods indicated this was no ordinary ferry flight. Something doesn't add up, Hartwell muttered to Major Vance. Transport missions don't typically require defensive electronic warfare systems. The canopy opened with a mechanical hiss, revealing the pilot who had been the subject of intense speculation for the past 10 minutes. Major Indira Thorn emerged from the cockpit with the fluid movements of someone completely comfortable in the three-dimensional world of high-performance aviation. She was smaller than expected, her flight suit bearing the faded patches and worn fabric that suggested extensive field use rather than garrison duty. Even from a distance, Rodriguez could see that Major Thorne carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made other pilots nervous. Her helmet bore additional kill markings beyond the standard combat mission indicators, and her survival vest was configured with the custom modifications that separated combat veterans from training squadron instructors. "She looks like the real deal," Rodriguez observed, unconsciously lowering his voice as if the pilot might somehow overhear him across the flight line. Major General Sterling had remained silent throughout the aircraft's arrival, his experienced eyes cataloging details that would have escaped less seasoned observers. The way Thorne shut down her aircraft, the precision of her post-flight inspection, and the practiced efficiency of her movements all suggested someone with extensive combat experience. "Sir, she's requesting immediate audience with the commanding officer," Captain Murphy reported through his radio. "Says she has information relevant to current operations." Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly. The timing continued to seem too convenient, but his instincts suggested that this mysterious pilot might represent the solution to their impossible tactical problem, rather than a new complication. "Bring her to the operations center immediately," Sterling ordered. "Full security escort, but treat her as a fellow officer until proven otherwise." Rodriguez returned his attention to the radio console, where Echo 77's desperate transmissions continued to paint an increasingly grim picture of their tactical situation. Chief Mackenzie's voice had grown hoarse from shouting orders above the sound of automatic weapons fire, and the intervals between transmissions were growing longer, suggesting that the SEAL team's position was becoming increasingly untenable. Outside, Major Thorne was walking toward the operations center with the measured pace of someone accustomed to crisis situations, her helmet tucked under her left arm and her flight gloves folded neatly in her free hand. Major Indira Thorne entered the operations center with the kind of quiet authority that instantly commanded attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, revealing a face marked by the subtle lines that came from years of squinting into hostile skis. Her brown eyes swept the room with tactical precision, cataloging personnel, equipment, and potential threats in the space of a heartbeat. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested multicultural origins, "I understand you have American personnel in contact with enemy forces." Major General Sterling stepped forward, his imposing presence usually sufficient to intimidate junior officers. Major Thorne met his gaze without flinching, her posture reflecting the kind of confidence that came from surviving situations where hesitation meant death. "Major Thorne, you've arrived at an interesting time," Sterling said, his tone carefully neutral. "Perhaps you'd like to explain your unscheduled appearance at my base during an ongoing tactical emergency." Thorne's expression didn't change, but Rodriguez noticed a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was accustomed to being questioned about her methods. "General, I monitor multiple emergency frequencies during long-range flights. I heard your SEAL team's distress calls approximately 20 minutes ago." Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell consulted his mission timeline, frowning at the implications. "Major, Echo 77's first distress transmission was 43 minutes ago, and subsequent communications have been heavily degraded by terrain and enemy jamming." "Correct," Thorne replied calmly. "I was monitoring frequency 243 MHz using enhanced communication equipment. Your men are trapped in a narrow canyon with enemy forces positioned above and below their defensive perimeter. They have one wounded, ammunition is running low, and they estimate 30 to 40 enemy combatants coordinating the assault." The operations center fell silent. The level of detail in Thorne's assessment matched their own intelligence estimates, but the accuracy seemed impossible given the communication difficulties they'd been experiencing. Major Vance looked up from her tablet, her expression showing confusion mixed with suspicion. "Major, how could you have received clearer transmissions than our base equipment? We have state-of-the-art communication arrays and trained operators." Thorne's smile was brief and enigmatic. "Major, my aircraft has been modified for specialized operations. Enhanced communication systems are part of the package." Sterling studied the mysterious pilot with renewed interest. Her casual mention of classified modifications suggested that Major Thorne's mission was far more complex than a simple transport flight between bases. "What's your proposal, Major?" Sterling asked, cutting through the diplomatic preliminaries. "General, your helicopters can't operate in the canyon's narrow confines, especially with degraded visibility from the approaching sandstorm. Your closest ground forces are hours away, and your men don't have hours." The radio crackled with another transmission from Echo 77, Chief Mackenzie's voice now showing strain. "Kandahar Base, taking heavy casualties. Ammunition critical. Require immediate assistance." Thorne glanced toward the radio console, her expression shifting to something harder and more focused. "General, I can provide close air support in terrain where larger aircraft cannot operate. My F-16 is configured for precision strikes in confined spaces." Hartwell frowned at the tactical implications. "Major, single aircraft operations in mountainous terrain during degraded weather conditions violate multiple safety protocols. You'd be flying into a tactical situation with no backup, no search and rescue capability, and limited ammunition." "Colonel," Thorne replied, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made seasoned warriors pay attention, "sometimes protocols are the enemy of American lives." The silence that followed Major Thorne's statement stretched for several heartbeats, filled with the weight of decisions that would echo through multiple careers and haunt dreams for years to come. Major General Sterling found himself studying this enigmatic pilot who had appeared from the darkness with solutions to problems that had seemed impossible just minutes earlier. "Major Thorne," Sterling said carefully, "what you're proposing amounts to a single aircraft rescue mission in terrain that would challenge an entire squadron under ideal conditions. The canyon walls will limit your maneuvering options, enemy air defenses are unknown, and weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly." Thorne's response came without hesitation. "General, I've flown combat missions in worse conditions against better-equipped enemies. Your men are dying right now while we discuss risk assessment protocols." Rodriguez watched the exchange with fascination, recognizing the tension between military bureaucracy and combat pragmatism that defined so many crucial moments in warfare. Major Thorne represented the kind of pilot that legends were built around, but her methods clearly challenged conventional wisdom about how air operations should be conducted. Major Vance consulted her tablet again, her fingers moving rapidly across weather data and tactical displays. "Sir, the meteorological window is closing fast. If Major Thorne is going to attempt this mission, she needs to launch within the next 15 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell stepped closer to the tactical display, his mind clearly working through the mathematical realities of close air support in confined spaces. "Major, even assuming you can locate the target area in reduced visibility, how do you plan to engage enemy positions without endangering the SEAL team? The margin for error in close air support is measured in meters, not kilometers." Thorne's smile was brief but confident. "Colonel, precision targeting is what I do. I've been providing close air support for special operations teams since before most people knew we were fighting wars in places they couldn't pronounce." The radio crackled again with Echo 77's increasingly desperate situation reports. This time, it was Petty Officer Ramirez's voice. "Kandahar Base, this is Echo 77 Communications. Chief is down. I say again, Chief is down. We need immediate medical evacuation." The announcement hit the operations center like a physical blow. Chief Mackenzie had been the steady voice holding Echo 77 together through their ordeal, and his incapacitation suggested that their tactical situation had deteriorated beyond critical. Sterling's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. The SEAL team's leadership structure was collapsing, their ammunition was running low, and conventional rescue options remained hours away. The mathematical certainty of their situation was becoming undeniable. "Major Thorne," Sterling said, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that would be analyzed by military historians, "if I authorize this mission, you'll be operating under my direct authority. Radio communication may be intermittent, you'll have no backup support, and extraction options are limited." Thorne nodded slowly, her dark eyes reflecting the kind of acceptance that came from choosing dangerous missions because they were necessary rather than safe. "General, I understand the risks, but your men understand them too, and they're facing them right now without any support at all." Outside, the wind was beginning to howl with increasing intensity as the sandstorm approached the base perimeter. Time was running out in multiple dimensions, and everyone in the room knew it. Sterling looked around the operations center, meeting the eyes of his staff officers and seeing his own grim assessment reflected in their expressions. Major General Sterling's decision came with the kind of quiet finality that separated career military officers from temporary occupants of command positions. "Major Thorne, you are authorized to provide immediate close air support to Echo 77. Launch when ready." The transformation in Major Thorne was immediate and striking. The slight tension that had characterized her interactions with base personnel vanished, replaced by the focused intensity of a combat pilot transitioning from planning to execution. She nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and gratitude. "General, I'll need current enemy positions, friendly locations, and any intelligence updates your communications team can provide," Thorne said, her voice shifting to the crisp professionalism that defined combat operations. Rodriguez immediately began preparing the tactical data package, his fingers flying over his equipment with renewed purpose. Finally, after 47 minutes of feeling helpless while American warriors died in distant mountains, he had a concrete mission that might actually save lives. "Major, I'm uploading current tactical information to frequency 251 MHz, Rodriguez reported. "Echo 77's last known position, estimated enemy strength, and terrain analysis." Thorne nodded while checking her watch, calculating flight time against the approaching weather front. "How long before that sandstorm grounds all aircraft?" Major Vance consulted her meteorological data, her expression grim. 43 minutes until visibility drops below minimums for close air support operations. After that, we're looking at 0-0 conditions for at least 6 hours. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. If Major Thorne couldn't locate and engage the enemy forces within the next 43 minutes, Echo 77 would be fighting alone until well after sunrise, assuming they survived that long. "Understood," Thorne replied, already moving toward the exit with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to operating under impossible deadlines. "I'll be airborne in 10 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell called after her. "Major, what's your call sign for this mission?" Thorne paused at the doorway, turning back with something that might have been a smile. "Same as always, Colonel, Banshee." The name hung in the air after she departed, carrying implications that none of the base personnel fully understood, but all somehow recognized as significant. Rodriguez had heard stories about pilots who operated on the edges of conventional military doctrine, warriors whose methods were unorthodox, but whose results spoke for themselves. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, "I've heard that call sign before. There are stories about a pilot named Banshee who's been providing close air support for classified operations across 3 different theaters." Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly, What kind of stories? The kind that usually aren't supposed to be told, sir. Impossible rescue missions, precision strikes in urban environments, operations that officially never happened. Major Vance looked up from her tablet, her expression showing surprise. Sir, I'm showing Major Thorne's current assignment as classified, but her service record indicates expertise in low-altitude penetration, precision targeting, and special operations support. The sound of jet engines spooling up could be heard through the operations center's reinforced walls, the distinctive whine of an F-16's turbofan reaching full power. Outside, Major Thorne was conducting her pre-flight procedures with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested she'd performed similar missions more times than anyone cared to count. "Gentlemen," Sterling said, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and resignation, "we're about to discover whether legends are born from desperation or skill." The radio crackled with Echo 77's latest situation report, Petty Officer Ramirez's voice now showing the strain of command responsibility. "Kandahar Base. Enemy forces massing for final assault. We cannot hold much longer." At 4:21 hours, Major Indira Banshee, Thorne's F-16C Fighting Falcon, lifted off from forward operating base Kandahar, with the kind of aggressive climb profile that pushed the aircraft's performance envelope to its absolute limits. Rodriguez tracked her departure on radar, watching as the single bright blip accelerated through the darkness toward terrain that had claimed countless aircraft over the decades. "Phantom 79 is airborne," Rodriguez reported, though everyone in the operations center could hear the jet's thunder echoing off the mountain walls surrounding the base. Sterling stood at the tactical display, his weathered fingers tracing the route that would take Major Thorne into the heart of the Korengal Valley. The flight path required precise navigation through mountain passes that were challenging under ideal conditions, let alone during pre-dawn darkness with a sandstorm approaching from the west. "Time to target area?" Sterling asked. 14 minutes at current speed," Major Vance replied, consulting her flight planning calculations. "But she'll need to reduce velocity for terrain following once she reaches the valley approaches." The radio remained ominously quiet from Echo 77's position, suggesting that the SEAL team was either maintaining communications discipline or had lost the ability to transmit. Neither possibility offered much comfort to the personnel monitoring their desperate situation. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell studied satellite imagery of the target area, his mind working through the tactical complexities that Major Thorne would face once she arrived. The canyon walls rose nearly vertical for hundreds of feet, creating a natural funnel that would limit her approach options while simultaneously providing excellent cover for enemy anti-aircraft weapons. "She's going to have to fly the canyon like a river," Hartwell observed, staying below the ridge line to avoid detection but high enough to identify targets. "The margin for error is essentially zero." Rodriguez continued monitoring multiple radio frequencies, hopping to re-establish contact with Echo 77, while simultaneously tracking Major Thorne's progress toward the target area. The professional calm he'd maintained throughout the crisis was beginning to show cracks as the mathematical realities of the situation became impossible to ignore. "Kandahar Base, this is Banshee," Major Thorne's voice cut through the static with startling clarity. "Approaching valley entrance, beginning terrain following profile. Request final update on friendly positions." "Banshee, Kandahar Base," Rodriguez replied immediately. Echo 77's last confirmed position was grid reference 794.6, elevation approximately 4,000 feet above sea level. Enemy forces estimated at 30 to 40 combatants positioned above and below friendly location. "Copy Kandahar, descending to attack altitude." The professional brevity of the exchange masked the extraordinary complexity of what Major Thorne was attempting. Flying close air support missions required split-second timing, absolute precision, and the kind of situational awareness that separated exceptional pilots from those who became statistics in military aviation accident reports. Major Vance looked up from her meteorological display, her expression showing increased concern. "Sir, the weather front is moving faster than predicted. We're looking at degraded visibility in less than 30 minutes." Sterling nodded grimly, understanding that their window for success was shrinking with each passing moment. Outside, the wind was already beginning to carry the first traces of sand and dust that heralded the approaching storm. "Rodriguez, attempt to re-establish contact with Echo 77, Sterling ordered. "I want to know their current status before Banshee reaches the target area." "Yes, sir." Rodriguez began cycling through frequencies, searching for any signal that might penetrate the electronic warfare environment that had isolated the SEAL team from outside support. The Korangal Valley spread below Major Thorne's F-16 like a moonscape carved by ancient geological violence, its rocky walls and narrow defiles presenting navigation challenges that would have intimidated lesser pilots. She flew at 200 feet above the canyon floor, her aircraft's terrain-following radar painting an electronic picture of obstacles and opportunities in the darkness ahead. "Kandahar Base, Banshee," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the turbulence that buffeted her aircraft as mountain winds interacted with jet exhaust. "Valley penetration complete, beginning search pattern for friendly forces." Rodriguez leaned closer to his radio console, straining to maintain communication clarity as atmospheric conditions deteriorated. "Banshee, Kandahar Base. Be advised, weather conditions are degrading rapidly. Visibility expected to drop below minimums in 27 minutes. "Copy, Kandahar. Time is not my friend today." Major Thorne's F-16 carved through the valley with the fluid precision of a raptor hunting prey, its advanced avionics systems working in concert to build a three-dimensional picture of the tactical environment. Her helmet-mounted display overlaid targeting information onto the natural landscape, transforming the chaos of combat into manageable geometric relationships. The first indication of Echo 77's location came not from radio transmissions, but from muzzle flashes painting temporary constellations against the canyon walls. Major Thorne's trained eye immediately identified the tactical situation: a small group of defenders firing from a rocky outcropping, while larger numbers of attackers maneuvered for advantageous positions above and below their target. "Kandahar Base, Banshee. I have visual contact with friendly forces. Multiple enemy positions identified, preparing for engagement." Sterling pressed closer to Rodriguez's radio console, his tension evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. "Banshee, Kandahar Base. Exercise extreme caution with proximity to friendly forces. Danger close protocols are in effect." "Understood, Kandahar. I've done this before." Major Thorne's F-16 banked into a steep climbing turn, using the canyon walls to mask her approach while simultaneously gaining altitude for her attack run. The maneuver required precise calculation of airspeed, angle of attack, and turning radius to avoid collision with terrain that rose vertically on both sides of her flight path. Her targeting pod locked onto the first group of enemy fighters, displaying range, bearing, and elevation data with digital precision. The mathematics of destruction had been reduced to numbers on a screen, but Major Thorne understood that those numbers represented American lives hanging in the balance. "Echo 77, Echo 77, this is Banshee inbound for close air support. Acknowledge if you can hear this transmission." The response came immediately, crackling with desperation and relief. "Banshee, this is Echo 77 Bravo. Thank God you're here. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Chief is down, Doc is treating casualties, ammunition critical." "Copy, Echo 77 Bravo. Identify your exact position with infrared marker if available." Banshee, we're marking our position now. Please be advised, enemy forces are within 50 meters of our defensive perimeter. Major Thorne's jaw tightened as she processed the tactical geometry. 50 meters represented an extremely dangerous proximity for close air support operations, requiring precision that pushed the limits of both human skill and weapons technology. The slightest miscalculation would result in friendly fire casualties that would haunt everyone involved for the remainder of their lives.